Zombie is one of those songs everybody knows. But why Zombie? It's arguably the most popular song to ever come out of Ireland. You've got that heavy guitar, Dolores O'Riordan's voice, and then that word being repeated over and over again. For years myself, I never really questioned it. I heard 1916, I saw the soldiers in the music video, and I thought I understood the song. Ireland, England, the Troubles, fighting, politics, job done. But I didn't understand it at all, because the story behind Zombie does not begin with an argument about Irish history. It begins actually with two children on a shopping street in Warrington. I've always had this strange instinct, right, to avoid everything that everybody else liked. I was a Dr. Pepper over Coke kind of person, Lilt over Fanta, whatever have you, right? And music as well, it's the same thing basically. I was always looking for the artist with, for example, 1,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, instead of listening to the bands that everybody else already knew. So the fact that Zombie was so popular almost worked against it. And to be fair, I wasn't exactly spending my teenage years studying Irish history. I was more interested in video games and drinking a naggin of vodka in a ditch on a Friday night. This ditch, actually. So I stuck a political label on the song anyway, and I just left it there. I left it labelled as a song about the Troubles. And I doubt that I was the only person who did that as well. But I had flattened the song into politics before I really understood the grief behind it. On the 20th of March 1993, 2 bombs exploded on Bridge Street, a busy shopping area in Warrington, Cheshire. They had been hidden inside cast iron litter bins. 56 people were injured. Johnathan Ball was 3 years old. He died at the scene, but Tim Parry was 12 and he suffered severe head injuries and died in hospital 5 days later. For years I knew that Zombie was connected to some bombing, but I didn't really know their names. I had never properly stopped to think about who they were, what their families went through, or what it meant for 2 ordinary kids to become part of a conflict they had nothing to do with. Now, since becoming a father myself, that is much harder for me to keep at a distance. My own son is 5 years old, and even allowing myself to imagine him caught up in something like this is almost unbearable. Johnathan and Tim were not political symbols here. They were children going about an ordinary Saturday with their families. And that was the part that I had missed when I reduced Zombie to a song about the Troubles. But the bombing itself is only the beginning of the story, because what turned Warrington into Zombie was the effect it had on a 21-year-old singer from Limerick and what Dolores O'Riordan saw in the days that followed. The Cranberries were touring in England when the Warrington bombing happened. Dolores later said that they were close to the area at the time, and she watched the aftermath unfold on television. What stayed with her most was the sight of one of the boys' mothers grieving. She spoke about the thought of a mother carrying a child for 9 months, raising him, and then losing him because somebody believed that planting a bomb would make a political point. That was the part she could not accept. Children were being killed by people who claimed that they were acting for a cause, and in this case, acting in the name of Ireland. Dolores later described Zombie as a cry against man's inhumanity to man and man's inhumanity to child. She was not sitting down to write the definitive explanation of the Troubles. She was reacting to the killing of children.
It's actually not about the north of Ireland. Zombie is about death of a child, a 3-year-old boy. That's what it's about. Happens to be the north of Ireland situation that made it occur.
And honestly, this is another part of the song I completely missed when I was younger. It is easy to look at a famous artist from a distance and imagine that their life is somehow separate from ordinary people and the things happening around them, right? But Dolores clearly felt this deeply. And the more I learned about her reaction, the more disappointed I became that I had never actually paid closer attention to her while she was still here. I could have actually gone out of my way to see the Cranberries live. I could have actually learned more about her and what she was actually trying to say, but I didn't. And each layer I've peeled away from this song since then has given me just far more respect for her, not only as a singer now, but as someone who saw something terrible, felt it personally, and refused to soften her response. But feeling that anger was only the beginning, because when Dolores brought the song to the rest of the band, Their usual sound simply wasn't going to work. Their words were angry, and she wanted the music to sound angry too. Before Zombie, the Cranberries were known for a much lighter sound. Their music was melodic and jangly, with far less of the thick distortion that would come to define this song. But when Dolores brought Zombie to the band, she did not want it treated like an ordinary Cranberries track. The first attempts were apparently too close to their usual style, so she pushed them harder. The guitars needed more distortion, the drums needed more force. The song needed to sound heavy because the feeling behind it was heavy. Noel Hogan later said that Zombie taught the band that they could be aggressive without losing melody, and the balance is a huge part of why the song works. The strange thing is, right, when I was younger, I assumed all Cranberries songs sounded like this, sounded like Zombie. Zombie was so big that just in my head, that heavy grunge sound was simply what the band did. Then I listened to more of their music and I realised, no, they really turned everything up to 11 for this song. And people often describe the song as angry, which it obviously is. The drums sound angry, Dolores sounds angry, the guitar feels like this huge dirty wall of noise. But I actually don't hear only anger here. There is something underneath it that feels much sadder. The chord changes as well. They pull the song between fury and something almost defeated. It sounds like grief that has just been pushed so far that it is nowhere else left to go except outward. The guitar gives the song weight, but Dolores' voice gives it pain. It could fill a stadium, but it still sounded deeply personal. The chorus was simple enough to remember after one listen, while the performance itself carried far more emotion than the words alone could explain. If the band had played Zombie like one of their earlier songs, it probably would not have landed in the same way. The heaviness was not added for style, it was part of the meaning. And there is an irony in that for me. I avoided the song because it was popular. I thought I was looking for music that was unusual, personal, and different from everything else. But that was exactly what Zombie was. It had been sitting in front of me the whole time. I was just too stubborn to hear it. But even after I began to understand the anger, the grief, and the sound of the song, one question was just still sitting there. Why did Dolores call it Zombie? And what exactly was she describing? The troubles are the setting of Zombie, but they are not the entire meaning of the song. The conflict sits behind everything like a constant noise. Old grievances, old identities, and old arguments as well, passed from one generation to the next. Then Dolores cuts through that noise and brings the listener back to the human cost. Another head hangs low. A child is slowly taken. The violence caused such silence. The lyrics here are not trying to explain every side of the conflict. They are showing what remains when political arguments become bombs and ordinary people are caught in the middle. Then she brings in 1916. The conflict did not suddenly begin with the Easter Rising. The political and cultural movements behind it had been growing for years, and although the Rising failed as well militarily, the executions that followed changed public opinion and helped push Ireland into the revolutionary period that came next. By the time Dolores wrote Zombie, nearly 80 years had passed, yet people were still dying in struggles inherited from previous generations. So when she sings, it's the same old theme since 1916, I don't hear a detailed history lesson here. I hear frustration, like why are we still doing this? How are we still doing this? And then there is the word itself, zombie. Dolores never left behind one clear explanation of exactly what she meant by that, and honestly, I like that. A good song normally leaves something open for the listener to work out. My own interpretation of it is quite simple, I think. When I imagine Zombie, I imagine something moving without thinking, something following the crowd, and it's driven by one urge, never stopping to question where it's going or why. So when Dolores asks, "What's in your head?" I hear her challenging the people who keep feeding the violence. Have you ever stopped to think about why you're doing this? Why are you planting the bombs? What cause is helped by killing a child? That may not be the definitive meaning, but what are your thoughts on it all? Have I missed something, or do you have a different opinion on it? I'd love to hear what you think about it. The zombie could represent people trapped in old hatred. It could represent a society that has become numb to repeated violence. It could even represent the dead who remain inside the minds of the people left behind. The word works because it is simple enough to understand, but broad enough to carry all of those ideas. It gives the song an image for people moving through the same cycle without questioning where it leads. And maybe that is why the word became so memorable. It sounds blunt because the song itself is blunt. It isn't trying to solve the troubles. It wasn't trying to solve the troubles. But that bluntness created another problem here, because once Dolores named 1916, condemned the bombing and said, "It's not me, it's not my family," people began asking, what side was she really taking here? Was Zombie simply anti-war, or was it specifically an anti-IRA song? This is where Zombie becomes difficult to separate from politics. The Troubles were not a simple conflict with two neat sides. Violence came from Republican and Loyalist paramilitaries, while British security forces as well were also responsible for deaths. Different communities carried different experiences of the conflict, different losses, and very different ideas about who was to blame. But the Warrington bombing was carried out by the IRA, so it is understandable that many people heard Zombie as an anti-IRA song. And in one sense as well, Dolores was directly condemning violence carried out in the name of Irish republicanism. She was angry that people responsible for attacks like Warrington claimed to represent Ireland. She said, "The IRA are not me. I'm not the IRA. The Cranberries are not the IRA. My family are not." But she also resisted the idea that the song belonged to one political side. She said, "I don't care whether it's Protestant or Catholic. I care about the fact that innocent people are being harmed." And I think this is where people naturally start trying to place the song inside a clear box. Anti-IRA, anti-Republican, anti-war, political, not political. We do like labels because labels make things easier to understand. But I don't think Zombie sits comfortably inside only one of them. It absolutely condemns a specific IRA bombing, but underneath that, it asks a much broader question. What do people believe they're achieving when the result is a dead child? Some critics felt Dolores was politically naive. They argued that she had reduced an incredibly complicated conflict to a handful of blunt lyrics. Others felt the song ignored the history and lived experiences that had allowed the violence to grow in the first place. And honestly, Zombie does simplify the Troubles, but it was never attempting to explain the entire conflict. I understand why people argued with the song. Irish history is very complicated, and identity as well is very complicated. The reasons people joined movements or supported certain causes cannot be explained in 4 minutes. But I also think that the bluntness is the song. If Dolores had tried to make every single line perfectly balanced, historically complete, and impossible to misinterpret, she might have removed the very thing that made it powerful. Children were dead. To her, that could not be treated as normal, and musicians should be allowed to respond to things like that. Irish music itself, folk music itself, has always been full of songs about rebellion, injustice, violence and identity. Artists speaking about the world around them is absolutely nothing new. The real question is not whether Dolores had the right to speak, it is whether listeners agree with what she said. That debate never completely disappeared. Decades later, when Irish rugby crowds began singing Zombie in stadiums, the same argument returned. Some heard a powerful anti-violence anthem, others heard a song condemning Irish republicanism while ignoring the wider conflict. But before Zombie could become a song sung by entire stadiums, people around the world first had to see it. And the music video gave Dolores' anger an image that was almost as unforgettable as the chorus. The music video took everything Zombie was expressing and gave it a visual identity. It was directed by Samuel Baer, with footage filmed in Los Angeles, Dublin and Belfast. Much of the video is shown in stark black and white. Soldiers patrol the streets, political murals cover the walls, children playing among damaged buildings and imitate the violence happening around them. Then the video cuts to Dolores. She is painted gold, standing in front of a cross, surrounded by children painted silver, holding bows and arrows. The contrast is deliberately strange. The gold imagery itself feels almost beautiful and religious, while the footage around it shows children growing up inside a conflict that they didn't create. Some of the original footage was considered too strong for television. The BBC and RTÉ as well reportedly aired an edited version that focused more heavily on the band performing, removing some of the images involving children and guns. The band did not support that version. It was the uncensored video that became iconic, but beneath all the images there, the spark remained very specific. It always was specific to Warrington and Johnathan Ball, and Tim Parry. And I think that distinction there matters. The video made this song look like it was speaking about an entire conflict. But as we know, the song itself came from Dolores reacting to the event and the two kids. But a powerful video does not automatically produce 1 billion views. So how did a song rooted in one bombing become one of the most famous songs ever to come out of Ireland? When I first started this channel, one day I was sitting in the car with my wife, trying to think of a video to make. So I asked her, if you went on Google right now, what would you type in? What would you search about Irish music? And she said, what's the most famous song from Ireland? That evening then I went home and I started researching. The video I eventually made became one of the first major successes for the channel. But what surprised me most while making it was the sheer size of Zombie. Its official music video had passed 1 billion views on YouTube. By that measure, I couldn't really put anything else at number one. I even had to move Enya down a place, which I really wasn't expecting to do. But that left me with a much more interesting question. How did a song inspired by the deaths of two boys in Warrington become one of the most widely recognised songs ever to come out of Ireland? Part of the answer here is that Zombie is simply an incredibly effective rock song. The guitar catches you almost immediately. The chord progression creates this mixture of heaviness and sadness. Dolores' voice sounds unmistakably Irish, but the chorus is simple enough to be remembered after hearing it only once or twice. Even the word zombie can be understood and shouted by people across completely different countries and languages. The song reached number one in several countries, became a massive alternative radio hit, and won Best Song at the MTV Europe Music Awards. It was covered by artists from completely different genres. Decades later, entire stadiums were still singing it together. But charts and awards only tell us how successful the song became. It doesn't really explain why. I think the real answer is that listeners didn't really need to understand every detail of Irish history to understand the feeling. You don't really need to know everything about the Easter Rising. You don't need to understand every group involved in the Troubles. You don't even need to know exactly what happened in Warrington. Grief here doesn't require a history lesson. Neither does anger at children being killed, and neither does the exhaustion of watching people repeat the same violence over and over again. That feeling travelled further than any politics ever could. To sum it up, Zombie took one specific tragedy and gave it a sound that people everywhere could easily recognise. It was grief pushed into anger, and the desperate wish that the killings would finally stop. And now, strangely enough, my 5-year-old son loves Zombie. His favourite part is the chorus. He walks around singing Zombie and even tries to copy the yodel, the break in Dolores' voice. Now, he also loves Minecraft, and Minecraft has zombies in it. So I'm not completely convinced he understands what he's singing yet. I haven't explained the full story to him either. Whenever he starts learning the verses, I'm sure the questions will come. But until then, I'm happy just hearing him singing that chorus every so often. And the fact that it stayed in his head as well after hearing it only once or twice, right, says something about why this song became so enormous. It has that rare quality of an anthem, and the word to take from this all is just simple. The melody just stays with you. The chorus can just be picked up by almost anybody. But for me, it doesn't sound simple anymore. Of course, I still hear that guitar, and I still hear that chorus there. But now I also hear Warrington, and I hear Johnathan Ball and Tim Parry, and I hear Dolores trying to make sense of something that never should have happened. But what about you now? Did you pick up the full story behind Zombie the first time you heard it? How did you come to really understand what it means? Let me know in the comments, because I'd be really interested to hear how or if the song changed when you first learned about Warrington. And as well, while you're down there in the comments, if you could please like the video and check if you're subscribed as well, especially the fact that you got here this far. It'd really help the video out, and I'd really appreciate it. And as well as that, there is another interesting story here that let me know if you'd like me to explore it. Like, why is Zombie so popular in India? That might actually explain why this song has 1 billion views. So let me know if you'd like to see something like that. But aside from that, I'd love to give a huge shout out to our channel members here. Here's your names up on screen. Thanks a million for your support over the last year. We've recently hit 25,000 subscribers, which is absolutely surreal for me. I think at the beginning of the year, I was thanking everybody for 10,000, so I didn't actually realise how fast it came on. Thanks a million to not only the members, but to absolutely everybody watching these videos. All of you are absolute legends. If you'd like to join the channel members, hit the join button down below. check out the links in the description for more information. It's just a way of supporting the channel a little bit more than just subscribing. As well as that, if you'd like to go on and check out the shop, go on ahead. There's plenty of Irish music bits and pieces there, as well as a few Dolores O'Riordan inspired designs there too. And finally, if you want to join the Discord server and start chatting with like-minded people now and then, feel free to join here. But look, anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks a million for watching as always. I hope you all have a great week ahead. Slán go fóill. Cheers.